Serena Mack was 40 years old when she watched her fiancé Raymond stand at the altar of a venue in Atlanta, Georgia on a Saturday afternoon in September, and she was still 40 years old 11 minutes into the reception that followed when she heard him say, to the man standing beside him at the edge of the terrace, that he had been with her sister Valerie yesterday and that Valerie was the one he should have chosen and that he had known it for most of the engagement. Serena was standing 6 feet away. She was wearing a dress she had chosen in April. She had a glass of sparkling water in her hand, which she had selected deliberately because she wanted to be completely clear for every minute of that evening. She was always very clear. Her husband had no idea that the catering company managing every element of that reception, the food, the staffing, the florals, the bar, the lighting design, the linen, the rentals, the coordination of 17 vendors across a 6-hour event, had been founded by his wife 8 years prior, and that his wedding planner had booked it on his wife's recommendation, and that his wife's name was on the operating agreement as majority owner with a 60% equity stake in a company that had generated Forbes $1 million in revenue the previous year. He had not asked. She had not told him. She had not needed to. She set the sparkling water on the nearest table. She walked through the main hall, past the floral arrangements her operations team had installed that morning, past the buffet her kitchen had prepared, past the bar her staff was managing, and out through the side door to the garden, where the evening light was very still. She took out her phone. She made one call. What happened at Raymond Mack's wedding reception after that call was not what he had planned. It was, in every detail, what Serena had decided. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning of the wedding had begun the way most significant mornings in Serena's professional life began, which was before the event, before the guests, before anyone who was not essential had arrived. She had been at the venue at 6:30, walking the setup with her operations manager Priya, reviewing the placement of each element against the run of show she had approved, and the timeline she had built, and the standard she applied to every event her company produced, which was the standard of a woman who had spent 8 years understanding that hospitality was not about the food or the flowers or the lighting and isolation, but about the total experience those elements produced when they were in their correct relationship to each other. She had not been scheduled to be at the venue. She had not told Raymond she would be there. She had an operations team that was entirely capable of running the event without her presence. And under normal circumstances, she would have been in her office reviewing the following week's proposals. These were not normal circumstances, and she had chosen to be present, and she had chosen not to explain the choice. She was a business owner, specifically the co-founder and majority equity holder of Mack Event Services, which she had incorporated 8 years prior under her maiden name in a decision she had made before the engagement with the clear-eyed understanding of a woman who had built something significant and intended to continue building it on terms that she controlled. The company operated in Atlanta and its surrounding markets, producing corporate events, social gatherings, and high-end private celebrations. It had 11 full-time employees, 2 satellite offices, and a client list that included 4 Fortune 500 companies and, as of 18 months ago, a wedding planning firm that had booked the Mack wedding through the standard referral process, which was the process Serena had established and which operated without reference to her personal relationship to any client because she had never had a reason to create a carve-out for that situation before. She had one now. She had decided not to use it. Her grandmother, a woman named Claudette, who had operated a catering business in Atlanta's West End for 35 years, and who had died when Serena was 31, had told her once that the most important decision in any service business was who you chose to serve and how completely you chose to serve them. She said, "You give everything that was agreed upon. You give it on time. You give it at full quality. And then you go home." She said, "The rest is not your business." She had also told Serena in a different conversation in a different year that a woman who knew exactly what she had built never needed to announce it. She said the announcement was for people who weren't certain. Serena was certain. She and Raymond had met at a gallery opening in Atlanta 6 years before the wedding. He was in commercial insurance, well-structured and dependable, with the specific quality she had found appealing, which was that he organized his commitments and honored them, and in the early years of their relationship, he had honored his commitments to her with a consistency she had taken as evidence of his character. She had introduced him to her family in the first year. She had introduced him to Valerie, her younger sister, in the second year at a Thanksgiving dinner that had gone well and produced no signal she had thought to read. She had been reading signals professionally for 8 years. She had missed this one. The engagement had been 3 years long, which was long by most measures, and which she had extended twice when the wedding planning process had produced dates that conflicted with significant events in the business calendar. She had explained both postponements to Raymond, and he had understood them and said the right things, and she had been grateful for that and had thought it said something accurate about him. The rehearsal dinner had been on Friday, at a restaurant Serena had recommended because the kitchen was excellent, and she knew the owner and the service would be what she needed it to be. She had sat at the head of the table with Raymond beside her, and had been present and warm through 3 hours of family and friends and toasts, and the particular warmth of an evening that appeared to be exactly what it was. Raymond's hand on her arm, his family's faces, her mother at the end of the table, watching with a particular contentment of a woman seeing something she had long wanted to see come together. Saturday morning, she was at the venue at 6:30. She walked the setup with Priya for 90 minutes. She adjusted the position of one floral arrangement. She approved the final bar configuration. She tasted 2 of the past appetizers and noted one adjustment for the kitchen. She reviewed the staffing positions. She confirmed the timeline. Then she went upstairs and changed into her dress, alone, in a room the venue had prepared for her, and sat with her coffee for 22 minutes before her mother arrived. Her mother helped with the veil. Her mother said the things mothers said. She looked at Serena in the mirror with the expression of someone who wanted the thing being witnessed to be what it appeared to be, and Serena looked back and smiled, and found the smile easy enough that she did not have to locate it. She had always been very good at being present in the moment required. The ceremony was 27 minutes. She heard her own voice say the required things, and she heard Raymond's voice say them, and she watched his face as he said them, and she did not find in it anything that required her to revise her understanding, which was not reassuring and was also not surprising, because she was a woman who had learned to read events precisely and had understood for some time that what she was seeing was the surface and not the whole. It was during the cocktail hour on the terrace at 11 minutes past the reception start that Raymond said what he said. She had been standing near the terrace's east edge with a glass of sparkling water, looking out at the garden where the lighting team had placed the lanterns exactly as the design specified, when she heard his voice at the cluster of guests 6 feet behind her and to her left. He was speaking to his cousin Darren, who had flown in from Houston, in the low and candid register that men used with the people they trusted most when they believed they were far enough from other ears. He said he had been with Valerie yesterday. He said Valerie was the one he should have chosen. He said he had known it for most of the engagement, but that the situation had its own momentum and he had let the momentum carry him here. Serena did not turn around. She looked at the garden. She looked at the lanterns her team had placed exactly where the design required them. She took one breath. Then she took a second one. Her face remained perfectly calm. She had spent 8 years running events for other people, which meant she had spent 8 years being present for things that were not about her, maintaining the composure that kept the professional context intact regardless of what was happening inside it. She had practiced this composure so thoroughly that it had become the truest thing about her in professional settings, the face that the work wore when it needed to be reliable. She needed it now. She set the sparkling water on the nearest table. She walked through the main hall at the pace she always walked, which was the pace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going and had nothing to prove about the speed of getting there. She went out through the side door to the garden. She called Priya. Priya answered in 2 rings. Serena gave her 4 instructions. She gave them in the order of their operational priority, with the specific language she used when she needed her team to understand that the instructions were final and not open to interpretation. Priya confirmed each one. She did not ask for explanation. She had worked for Serena for 4 years, and she understood the difference between an instruction that was administrative and an instruction that was something else. The instructions were as follows. First, the premium bar service, the single malt selections, and the aged spirits that had been specified on the original contract for the reception's final 2 hours was to be replaced with the standard service package for the remainder of the evening. The substitution was within Mac Event Services' standard operating terms, which the wedding planner had signed. Second, the late-night dessert service, a custom arrangement Serena had authorized at her own discretion as a gift to the event, was canceled. The standard plated dessert would be served. The custom arrangement had been authorized by Serena personally and could be withdrawn by Serena personally. Third, the extended staffing arrangement, which had been added to the contract at no charge as a professional courtesy, was to revert to the standard contracted hours. Staff would begin clearing at the contracted end time. Fourth, the morning after brunch delivery, which had also been a personal gift from Serena that existed in no contract document because it had never been a contracted service, was canceled effective immediately. Priya confirmed all 4. She said she understood. She said the adjustments were within operating parameters. Serena said, "Thank you." She said full service through the contracted period. Nothing less. She put the phone in her bag. She stood in the garden for a moment with the lanterns around her, the light exactly as she had specified it, warm and low and even, the kind of light that made people feel more beautiful than the overhead lighting in most event spaces would allow, which was why she had specified it. She was good at that. She had always been good at understanding what a space needed to become what the people in it required. She went back inside. She found her mother at a table near the dance floor. She sat beside her. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. She stayed for 2 hours and 17 minutes, which was the length of time the reception required her presence to be unremarkable, and then she found Raymond at the bar and she told him she had a headache and she was going home. He said he would come with her. She said she was fine. She said he should stay. She said it in the warm and easy way she had said most things in the 3 years of their engagement. The tone that communicated care without opening a conversation. She hugged her mother in the parking garage. Her mother looked at her with the particular attention of a woman who was not certain what she was seeing. Serena squeezed her hand and said she was tired and would call tomorrow. She drove herself home. The following week was the one Raymond had planned as the beginning of their married life, which included a honeymoon he had arranged, and a domestic routine he had envisioned, and a future he had projected forward from the momentum of a situation he had allowed to carry him. She had not told him anything. She had not told him what she had heard, and she had not told him what she had done, which was the approach she had decided on in the garden with the lanterns around her, which was to take no visible action until she had taken all of the necessary invisible ones. She spent a week in her office, she reviewed the accounts, she pulled the contract for the wedding event, and reviewed every line, noting the items that had been gifted versus contracted, and documenting the withdrawal of the gifted items in the event record with timestamps. She reviewed the operating agreement for Mac Event Services. She called Josephine Crane, the attorney who had drafted the company's formation documents and who had been her personal legal advisor for 6 years. She told Josephine what she had heard. She told her what she intended to do. She told her the order in which she intended to do it, because she was a woman who moved through consequential decisions in the correct sequence. Josephine said, "I can have the documents ready by end of week." Serena said, "Thursday is fine." Her uncle Percy, her mother's brother, who had operated a contracting business in Atlanta for 40 years and who had been the person who first told her that a well-run business was the best answer to most questions a person would face in their adult life, came to dinner on Wednesday. She told him what she had heard on the terrace. He listened to all of it. He set his fork down. He said, "Your grandmother always said the announcement was for people who weren't certain." She said, "I know." He said, "What do you need from me?" She said she needed him to be available next Tuesday at 10 in the morning. He said he would be there. Raymond came home from the honeymoon on Sunday to a house that was arranged the same way it had always been arranged, with Serena's usual quiet order, and to a wife who was composed and present, and who had made dinner, and who asked about the trip and listened to the answer, and who had, in the preceding 10 days, retained an attorney, organized the documentation for the separation of their shared financial accounts, reviewed the terms of the prenuptial agreement she had insisted on, and which Raymond had signed without consulting an attorney of his own, and arranged a meeting for Tuesday morning at Josephine's office. On Tuesday morning, Raymond arrived at the meeting expecting what Serena had told him it was, which was a routine financial review that her attorney had scheduled as a matter of post-wedding housekeeping. He arrived in the manner he arrived at most things, which was with the composed assurance of a man who believed he understood the shape of his own life. He sat down across from Josephine. He looked at Serena beside her. He looked at Percy at the end of the table. Josephine placed the first document on the table. It was the operating agreement for Mac Event Services, with the ownership structure highlighted Serena Mac 60%. She placed the company's financial summary for the previous year. She placed the event contract for the wedding reception, which had been booked through the standard referral process and which listed Mac Event Services as the operating vendor for all 17 service categories. She said, "Your wedding reception was produced by your wife's company." She said this in the matter-of-fact tone of a woman stating a fact that was on the paper in front of everyone in the room. Raymond looked at the operating agreement. He looked at the event contract. He looked at Serena. She watched his face do the calculation. The company name that he had seen on the vendor list months ago and had not connected. The signature on the catering agreement. The 8 years of Saturday mornings she had gone in early and the Friday evenings she had stayed late, and the operational conversations he had heard from a room away and had never fully attended to because the work had always been in the background of a life he was living in the foreground. Josephine placed the second document, the prenuptial agreement signed 14 months before the wedding by both parties, which protected Mac Event Services and all its derivative value as Serena's separate property. She placed the separation petition, which she had drafted and which Serena had reviewed and approved. She said the petition would be filed Thursday. Raymond said, "You knew." He said it in the voice of a man locating the shape of a thing that had been present for longer than he had realized. Serena looked at him. She said, "I heard what you said on the terrace." She said she had heard it clearly, because she was a woman who paid attention to what was happening in her rooms, and the terrace was a room she had managed. She said one more thing. She said, "I gave you everything the contract specified." She said, "Nothing more and nothing less." She stood. She gathered her bag. She nodded to Percy, who nodded back with the expression of a man who had known his niece for 40 years and had never once underestimated what she was capable of. She thanked Josephine. She walked out of the office and into the ordinary Tuesday morning, and she drove herself to work, because the next event was in 3 weeks and there were proposals on her desk that required her attention. 8 months later, Serena Mac operated Mac Event Services from a new office space she had leased in Buckhead, a larger space than the previous one because the company had grown sufficiently in the preceding year to require it. In part because 2 corporate clients whose events she had managed in the fall had renewed their contracts, and in part because a feature profile of the company in an Atlanta business publication had produced 14 new inquiries in a single month, which was more than the company had ever received from a single source. She had renovated the office herself, overseeing every decision from the floor treatment to the lighting specification to the configuration of the production suite where her team built the event designs. Because she was a woman who understood that the environment in which work happened shaped the quality of the work, and she intended her environment to reflect what she expected of herself. She had also planted a small garden outside the office's entrance in a planter box she had built over a weekend in January with help from her nephew, a corner of green in an otherwise concrete block that her grandmother Claudette would have recognized as the kind of unnecessary and entirely necessary thing that distinguished the space people wanted to be in from a space they merely occupied. A man named Marcus, who was a landscape architect she had met through a mutual colleague and who had designed the planting scheme for the office garden, and who had subsequently found reasons to discuss the ongoing maintenance of it in person, at intervals that had nothing to do with the maintenance requirements, had been invited to a function she was hosting in April and had responded that he would be there and had been there and had stayed until the end. He was a quiet man who noticed things and did not require his noticing to be announced, which was the quality she had come to value most in another person, having spent enough years in rooms with people who required their observations to be performed. Raymond had retained an attorney in October and had contested 2 provisions in the separation agreement, both of which had been resolved through a single mediation session in November in Josephine's favor. He remained in commercial insurance. He had not seen Valerie since September, which Serena's mother had mentioned without elaboration at a Sunday dinner in January, and Serena had noted without comment. She had heard, through her mother, that the event at which Raymond's friends most often referenced the wedding was not the ceremony or the dinner that followed. It was the moment in the final hour when the premium bar had gone to standard service, which had been noticed, and which several guests had found puzzling, and which Raymond had been unable to explain because he had not known it was going to happen and had not understood, when it did, why it had. He understood now. He had understood since Tuesday morning. On a Saturday morning in May, Serena arrived at a venue in Buckhead before the guests, before the setup crew had finished, in the pre-event quiet she had always preferred. With her run of show in hand and her coffee from the shop on the corner, and she walked the space the way she always walked it. From the entrance to the ceremony area, to the reception hall, to the kitchen, to the garden, making the small adjustments that made a space ready. And then standing in the garden for a moment in the early light, with the event around her in its nearly finished state and the day not yet begun. She thought of her grandmother, Claudette. She thought of the 35 years of the West End catering business and of the woman who had told her that the most important decision in any service business was who you chose to serve and how completely you chose to serve them. And of the other thing she had said in a different year, which was that a woman who knew exactly what she had built never needed to announce it, because the announcement was for people who were not certain. Serena was certain. She had always been certain. The announcement had been on every vendor list and in every operating agreement and in the company's name itself, and Raymond had simply never looked closely enough to read it. She had given Raymond everything the contract specified. She had kept everything else. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.